The release of the PlayStation in the UK brought the might of the arcade machines back home once more. While Sega had been boasting that the Mega Drive was an arcade machine in your living room, times had moved on and so had technology. Once again, the best experiences were had at 50p a time, and games were advancing far beyond what the 16-bit consoles were able to do. Things were starting to go 3D, which was something of a speciality for Sony's little grey box. The PlayStation not only brought the arcade back to the living room, but also brought it back to the arcades again, as several arcade manufacturers used the console as the basis for their own machines. This had the added advantage of it being reasonably simple to port arcade games over to retail PlayStations once their time in the co-op spotlight had passed. Interestingly, a lot of these games were fighting games, which gave the PlayStation a wealth of solid titles in the genre. While Sega may have been the first to make 3D fighting games a reality, Sony were the architects in the genre's success, with Namco, among others, taking full advantage of the new hardware available to them. In this video, we shall have a look at some of the fighting games that helped make the PlayStation the place to brawl in the UK.
Eight traveling fighters brought together by a common destiny now meet at the battle arena Toshinden. Many years have passed since this tournament, known only to those in the underworld, was last held. Some fighters have come for personal glory. Others have come to fight for those they love. But all will do their best to be victorious in this tournament, which will decide their fortunes.
As launch titles go, there was much to be impressed by when first casting eyes on Battle Arena Toshinden. It was developed by Tamsoft and released by Sony directly on the day of the PS1's launch in the US and Europe, while those in Japan got it on the 1st of January 1995, released by Takara. Until Virtua Fighter happened, fighting games had been 2D affairs, with colourful hand-drawn sprites or digitised people duking it out. Now the 3D revolution was happening right there in front of us, in a game that made Sega's offering feel as dry as a sandcracker. Instead of being an arcade port, Toshinden was built for consoles, and so had the opportunity to wring every last drop of available power from the system. However, there are rarely any launch games that manage to wrangle all the power from their respective consoles, and this was no exception. At the time of release, the game was highly reviewed and celebrated for its graphics, the ability to sidestep, and overall style. However, it was one of the frontrunners in the genre, and would soon be overtaken by other games in this video. Most early 3D games generally don't age well, and Battle Arena Toshinden has certainly suffered during the test of time. The graphics are still reasonable for a game of the era, and it still most stand up today, with the textures being basic but detailed enough to show some flair. However, the game feels a lot like wading through treacle. Controls are sharp and accurate, but moves feel sluggish, and characters move in a way that seems slow and heavy, yet floaty and light at the same time, which is something that has to be experienced to be understood. This is especially noticeable in the PAL version, thanks to our games running at 50Hz instead of 60Hz. There are some nice pieces of attention to detail to be found. For example, Sophia will lay her whip down while going in for the many slaps throw, picking it back up again afterwards. However, a few nice touches here and there do not save this game. One good thing about the game is the outstanding soundtrack. While it does have a bit of one man in his Yamaha feel about it, it hits exactly the right beats to bring a level of energy to each fight without trying to make itself the centre of attention, with notable exceptions being Edgy's theme and Show's theme, the former being a cracking cheese fest of glory, while the latter being an abbreviation of Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor. Interestingly, the Japanese soundtrack differs slightly to the Western soundtrack, with some tracks having different instrumentations or mixes. It certainly makes it worthwhile to hunt down each version if you're a fan of the score, and the Toshinden retake and remix soundtrack is also worth searching for on YouTube. Character voices for some characters are also different in the Japanese version, with Sophia's being the most noticeable. Overall though, Battle Arena Toshinden is a great starting point for fighting games on the PlayStation in the UK. The sequels it generated weren't as highly praised, and the concept of weapons-based 3D combat was evolved by future games. It's clunky and dated by today's standards, and is hard to go back to in these modern times, but spending time with the game and getting to learn it a bit has been entertaining.
Fighter EX plus Alpha.
Jumping forward in time a bit to the 20th of November 1997, Capcom decided it was time Street Fighter was given a 3D coat of paint. Having spent some time in the arcade, the PlayStation was given an enhanced version of Street Fighter X Plus, itself an enhanced version of Street Fighter EX. This version adds Alpha to the end, making the rather unwieldy Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha, and combines the mechanics of Street Fighter with 3D polygonal characters. The arcade versions ran on Sony ZN1 hardware, as did Battle Arena Toshinden 2 and Bloody Roar 2. The ZN1 was a PlayStation board that had been beefed up to arcade standards, so when this version of Street Fighter was brought over to the home consoles, not only was it able to bring all 21 characters from EX Plus with it, it also came with 2 additional characters, extra modes, and an extra bonus stage. The question is, was it worth it? Short answer, probably not. The game was developed by Akira and published in PAL territories by Virgin Interactive, and while Capcom may have had input into the game, you can tell it wasn't developed in-house. The character models are good, if a little blocky, and the animations are fluid enough, but the fast-paced, intense battle that 2D Street Fighters are known for is gone. What's left is slow and devoid of intensity. Characters feel floaty and unresponsive, movement is sluggish, and the feeling of the game is different. While core mechanics are all present and correct, the transition to 3D models removed all of the soul of the hand-drawn animated fighters. While 23 characters does sound like a good number to choose from, there isn't much to distinguish the new characters from each other, and while the returning characters have all their familiar special moves and abilities, the new characters feel a bit samey, and the number of Ryu clones hits an all-new level in this game, with a lot of the new characters cribbing from either the Shota fighters or taking moves from other established characters. Complete the arcade mode, and you're shown a short piece of FMV before the credits. These are mostly worthless, and feature no advancement to the character's story, and would have been better served by static images and some text. Then again, if the rest of the presentation is to go by, maybe skipping endings altogether would have been a better option. Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha is an interesting take on the classic Street Fighter formula, and the series' first foray into 3D, albeit in a 2.5D game. Sadly, it's let down by slow gameplay, lack of variety, and poor presentation. It did well enough to spawn a couple of sequels, but if you've yet to experience this game, you're not missing much.
The crushing pound of the mallet. The shattering blow of the club. The slashing edge of the blade. They call to you.
The late 90s didn't just see the release of the first Street Fighter to use polygonal fighters, they also saw the release of the first 3D Mortal Kombat. Previous games in the series had used real actors and digitized them into characters in the game. The format had gotten rather stale by Mortal Kombat 3, so something drastic was needed to revitalize the series. Going full 3D was that drastic thing. Running on the Midway Zeus arcade board and releasing in 1997, MK4 gave the Mortal Kombat universe a whole new dimension. It was then ported to PlayStation by Eurocom and distributed by GT Interactive in 1998. The game opens with Raiden giving some exposition, telling a story from before the first MK game and setting up the plot and foreshadowing for the end boss. With the story being one of the series' stronger points, it's nice to see the lore explored further and gives us a new someone to beat after the defeat of Shao Kahn. This gets expanded upon further when completing arcade mode, with each character getting a full FMV ending complete with voice acting. Terrible voice acting, granted, but voice acting nonetheless. Legend has it that Mortal Kombat 4 was the first fighting game on PlayStation to have synced voice acting in its cutscenes. The main character roster consists of 15 fighters with 3 bonus fighters available. There is a good mix of new and returning combatants, and a lot of favourites included for the fans. The new characters are diverse in their movesets, though visually there are some obvious callbacks to people who did not return. Reiko looks like a palette-swapped unmasked ninja, while Tanya is a palette swap of Katana, and while the Princess of Edenia wasn't a playable fighter, her model appears in Liu Kang's ending in the arcade version. With the PlayStation release getting full FMV endings, Katana's model was no longer needed, so got deleted from the game. However, her moves can be allocated to another character via action replay codes, showing she was meant to be a full-fledged member of the cast at some point during development. The usual Mortal Kombat formula is there, with the buttons used for high and low punches and kicks, a block button, and the run button from Mortal Kombat 3 returns. However, there have been some additions to take advantage of the 3D environment. The first is the introduction of a sidestep, allowing basic movement into and out of the screen. A small thing for fighting games, as this mechanic had been around for years at this point, but for Mortal Kombat, this was a game changer. Strategies that had previously relied on zone control and projectiles were now easily foiled by a quick sidestep and rush in. To survive, a player had to evolve. The second addition was again something that wasn't new to the genre, but new to the series. Weapons could now be brought out mid-fight, which would change a character's fighting style a bit and came with their own special moves. These could also be put away, dropped, or even thrown at your opponent. However, a dropped weapon could then be picked up and used by the other combatant. Some stages even had items ready and waiting to be thrown at the opposition. The additions of weapons in Mortal Kombat was huge, and the way they could be interacted with was an interesting evolution in the genre. The final major addition worth mentioning was a maximum damage combo breaker. This would automatically throw your character away from your opponent once your combo had hit above 40% health. The fighting mechanics were somewhat broken in the shift to 3D, and a lot of characters had infinite combos. To get around this, the maximum damage cap was introduced to try and balance the gameplay. It's not the cleanest way of dealing with the issue, but it was certainly effective. The Azure's arcade board was more powerful than PlayStation, which meant significant graphical downgrades had to be made when porting the game. MK4 is by far the most ugliest looking Mortal Kombat game that there has ever been. However, what they sacrificed in looks, they gave back in speed. This game is certainly one of the fastest 3D fighting games on the console. It's not the most deep or technical, and there are a fair few issues mechanically, but the action is top notch, for a Mortal Kombat game at least. With the runability from MK3 intact, MK4 is a fast and furious game. Of course, the game wouldn't be Mortal Kombat without a selection of finishing moves to end a battle. Each character gets 2 fatalities, and 2 stages also have a fatality, the Tomb and the Prison. The former being a classic spiked ceiling, while the latter has the loser thrown into the blades of a giant fan. Each fatality feels reasonably unique, even when there are updates to classic fatalities such as Scorpion's Toasty and Liu Kang's Dragon. My personal favourite is Quan Chi's leg rip and beat fatality. Friendships, babalities and animalities are gone, but this allows for the game to focus on the good stuff and deliver the gory finishes the series is known for. This is a Mortal Kombat game through and through, albeit an ugly one. However, it is saved by some fast action that even today still provides some frantic and entertaining fights. Is it the best 3D fighter on PlayStation? Not at all, but that doesn't mean it's not a lot of fun. With a reasonable character roster, a good selection of fatalities, and some new mechanics that actually enhance the series as Midway took advantage of the 3D space, Mortal Kombat 4 is a game that's well worth revisiting, just so long as you can get past the visuals, that is. Tekken is a franchise that has stood the test of time. From the early days when it dethroned Battle Arena Toshinden as the creme of fighting games on the PlayStation 1, right up to the modern times on much more advanced hardware. The first game, Tekken, was the first PlayStation title to sell over 1 million units, and the series has gone from strength to strength ever since. The final game on PlayStation was also my favourite of the series so far, and that was Tekken 3. The Tekken series had been developed by Namco, and originally saw life in the arcades running on their System 11 hardware, which was their take on beefing up a PlayStation for arcade use. Tekken 3 was the first in the series to run on the upgraded Namco System 12, and took full advantage of the system. The first obvious difference is the somewhat blocky graphics of the earlier games have been smoothed out a lot, and have much better texture work, and the backgrounds are more expansive and detailed. The game speed was also improved, with motion-captured fightings and more realistic physics, which cemented the game as the best in the series so far. Of course, that meant when porting the game to PlayStation, downgrades were going to have to be made. Despite Namco originally not thinking Tekken 3 would be able to be ported to PlayStation, they managed to achieve it, letting Sony publish the game directly. The characters retained their looks, albeit with a lower polygon count than the arcade version, and the game retained its speed. Downgrades were mostly made to the stages and effects. For example, the carousel in Ling Chao Yu stage is static instead of animated, and the backgrounds were flat instead of 3D renders. But aside from a few tweaks for balance, the gameplay remained largely untouched. It was slower in PAL areas, as is the norm for PS1 games thanks to the 50-60Hz issue, but without exposure to the NTSC versions, we didn't know any different. The game felt faster than the previous Tekken games, and that's all that mattered. There are 23 playable fighters in the game. Most of the cast were new characters, with only a select few returning from the previous games. However, a fair few of the newcomers were replacements for their missing counterparts. Forest Law was the son of Martial Law, Hwarong was the student of Baekdo-san, Gunjack was the evolution of Jack, and King was the successor of the original King. Wholly new characters included Eddie Gordo, Ling Xiaoyu, Brian Fury, and Panda. The PlayStation also got a couple of exclusive characters, Gon and Dr. B, though the less said about them, the better. PlayStation owners were also treated to a couple of new modes. Tekken Force was a side-scrolling beat-em-up which was available from the start, while Tekken Bowl was an unlockable bowling minigame that was far more entertaining than it had any right to be. Completing arcade mode with each fighter would unlock that character's ending video, further pushing the story along. While the original Tekken games had a story, it hadn't been as forefront as it was in Tekken 3. The game opens with a long FMV sequence filling the player in on what had happened since the last game, 20 in-game years ago, as well as introducing the new characters. Not all of the endings furthered the canon story, the focus of which was the Mishima Empire and the rivalry of the family, and some endings were more fluff than substance. Anna found her ending censored outside of Japan, as it seems Nina's trick with Anna's top was deemed unsuitable for the West, but the others survived intact. Of all the Tekken games on PlayStation 1, Tekken 3 was to get the highest acclaim. Critics loved it, players loved it, and it really pushed the console to its limits. Namco released the game to PAL regions on September 12, 1998, and we all never looked back. It was the most polished 3D fighting game on PlayStation, and truly demonstrated the power of Sony's machine, cementing Namco as one of the kings in the fighting game genre. However, Tekken wasn't to be their only success.
You win.
Transcending history and the world, a tale of soul and swords, eternally retold.
May 1997 saw the UK release of the first game in another series of fighting games from Namco that has stood the test of time. In the arcades, the game was called SoulEdge, and it ran on the System 11 hardware like the first two Tekken games. It was ported to PlayStation, and in the US and PAL areas, SoulEdge became Soul Blade, the first in the long-running Soul series. Unlike Tekken, Soul Blade opts for weapons combat instead of fisticuffs, giving the player 3 attack buttons: horizontal attacks, which are quick but weak, vertical attacks, which are slower but deal more damage, and a kick. A fourth button is for blocking, as Soul Blade goes the Mortal Kombat route of having an active block button. Add in the ability to sidestep, and give stages a finite boundary, and you have all the ingredients for a fast and action-packed fighting game. While there were entries in the genre that did weapons-based combat first, Soul Blade refined things. No longer were they a cumbersome addition that got in the way, now they felt like an extension of the body. Moves and combos felt natural, with options and mix-ups to keep players guessing. Every character was balanced, with each one feeling unique and useful in their own way. Smaller combatants like Taki can duck in, land a few hits and duck out again before a counterattack can happen, while the larger characters like Rock hit like a truck but take longer to pull off their more devastating moves, which can leave them open for a moment. Whatever way you wish to play, there is someone there to suit your style. The weapons aren't just there for show either, they form a key part of the strategy. Block too often and you risk losing your weapon for the round, which leaves you vulnerable to being torn apart if you're not careful. Ring-outs are also an effective measure against oppressive opponents, where skillful manoeuvring around the stage, a losing player can turn the tide using the battlefield as the weapon. It's not perfect, however, and there are some missteps. It takes too long to get up again once you've been knocked down, and jumps are as floaty and high as previous games in the genre. But unlike in other games where this would diminish the experience, in Soul Blade they are minor annoyances that you swiftly get used to. With fast and smooth character movement in all other aspects, these grievances are easily forgiven. Mostly. While the arcade game just focused on the fighting, the PlayStation got a wealth of extra options, including the Edgemaster mode, which delves deep into the lore of the game and opens up an expansive and deep story experience, as well as being an excuse to do lots of fighting with the chance to gain additional weapons, which can then be taken into the arcade mode. These weapons have their own attributes and are far more than just cosmetic upgrades. Other additions include extra costumes, an outstanding FMV intro sequence, and the choice of 3 soundtracks, including one made exclusively for the PlayStation version of the game. With Edgemaster mode telling the story of the overall game, each character also has an in-engine ending sequence, with most having interactive elements which could determine how the story pans out. Mitsurugi will fight against Tanegashima, a Japanese matchlock rifle. Taki will be attacked by the SoulEdge blades, while Siegfried may succumb to the power held deep within SoulEdge and be corrupted by it. All of this is determined by pressing the correct buttons at the correct time, or completing a certain task. Failure gives the bad ending, while success grants the good one. Like other fighting games, these endings may or may not be canon to the overall story, but the hidden QuickTime events encourage replay for those who know they're there. It's worth remembering, Soul Blade came out before the Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat games in this video, and was more competent than both of them combined. While it was developed by a different team in Namco than the Tekken team, it's clear that there was some rivalry there, and each wanted their game to be the best, resulting in some fantastic titles. Getting to work on PlayStation hardware for the arcade machines appears to have enabled Namco to build some solid fighters and spawned 2 series of games that are still around today. Soul Blade may be older and less refined than the sequel Soul Calibur series, but the game still stands up today as enjoyable and thoroughly playable, and is well worth looking up if the mood takes you. So that was some of the fighting games available on the PlayStation. It was by no means a comprehensive list, and there are plenty of others out there that are worth playing. These were just a few of the ones I own, and for the most part enjoyed. If you like some 2D fighting, the PlayStation also has you covered, and there are plenty of entertaining games available for the system. The great thing about Sony's device is there are truly something for everyone. 2D, 3D, or even arena style, the PlayStation 1 was packed with great games to wail on your friends, family or foe. If you ever get the chance, it's worth delving into the system's back catalogue and enriching yourself in the history of some of your favourite franchises. They really were for the players.
Thank you for watching. This has been a TigerTails Gaming video celebrating PlayStation Month. If you'd like to keep on top with what we're doing for this month, you can hit one of the videos that are on the screen somewhere, or you can click on the nice subscribe button that we got floating around as well.
Yep. Or you can follow us at TigerTailsGaming.co.uk.
And if you want to help us feed the algorithm, feel free to leave us a like or a comment as well.
Absolutely. But on that note, we need to say goodbye, everybody.
So it's bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.